Hey everyone, I hope all of you guys are doing good and staying safe. In the previous video about the AWS network firewall, we saw a little bit of theory, and then I showed you one small diagram that gives you a good overview into if you just have one public subnet, how would you ensure that all of the traffic that leaves your VPC and the traffic that comes into your VPC is inspected by the network firewall. So in this architecture diagram, it's a little bit more clearer with a little bit more of granularity so that you can understand it in more detail. So we have an AWS cloud within which we have a VPC of 10.0.0.0/16. The public subnet probably could be 10.0.0.0/24. The private subnet would be 10.0.1.0/24. And you have to dedicate a separate firewall subnet as part of best practice, where it could also be 10.0.2.0/24. And that firewall subnet is where you would go ahead and map that firewall subnet to an availability zone. And then when you create the network firewall, that network firewall would start creating an interface endpoint pointed to a gateway load balancer or powered by a gateway load balancer in your firewall subnet. And then you can see that in a private public subnet architecture, which we have discussed so much in detail before, we always have a NAT gateway for the private subnet to get internet related traffic. And the NAT gateway would always have an elastic IP associated with it. And just for a small use case, let's say that we have two EC2 instances, one in the public subnet and one in the private subnet. And then of course we have an internet gateway in your VPC. And then of course the DNS resolution is done on the VPC level or probably on the AWS cloud level. And then you can have your internet related traffic somewhere over here, right? So now let's take a look at the forward flow of traffic and the reverse flow of traffic. Whenever someone tries to access something within your VPC from the internet, you have to ensure that you have an edge association. Remember this very clearly. It's not a subnet association. It's called as an edge association, where the internet gateway itself has a dedicated route table. And then the traffic would go through the network firewall through its interface endpoint. So something over here, this red line over here, would go through the interface endpoint. And you can see that the firewall subnet itself has its own route table. And then you can see that only through the firewall subnets route table, the traffic would go through the public subnet and the private subnet. So in that way, all of the traffic that comes from the internet is always inspected by the firewall subnet, because the internet gateway's route table is going to have, if suppose the traffic is going to go to 10.0.0.0/24, or the traffic is going to go to 10.0.1.0/24, all the traffic should go through the VPC endpoint of the firewall in that particular subnet. So in that way, only after the traffic has been inspected by the firewall would the traffic be allowed or passed through or dropped if it's a malicious traffic. So in that way, you get to inspect all of your internet related traffic. But let's say that you would like some traffic to go from within your VPC to the internet. All those traffic. So let's say, for example, the private subnet related internet traffic would go through the NAT gateway, but then the public subnets traffic would not directly go through the internet gateway. It would go through again the VPC endpoint that is being created for the network firewall. So in that way, the route table of the public subnet would say, instead of 0.0.0.0 pointing to the internet gateway, it would say 0.0.0.0 points to the gateway endpoint of the interface endpoint of the firewall. So in that way, all of the traffic from within your VPC would again be inspected by the network firewall. So the main motive behind this is all the traffic from the internet is inspected by the network firewall, where you have stateful and stateless rule groups attached with a firewall policy attached to a network firewall. And all of the traffic from within your VPC, if they want to go to the internet, is also inspected by the network firewall. So in the next video, I'll show you a small example where I have a public private subnet kind of architecture, but I have a specific subnet dedicated to the network firewall. And I have 4 route tables in play, one route table with an edge association of internet gateway, one route table associated with the private subnet, one route table associated with the public subnet, and one route table associated with the firewall subnet. So I'll see you all in the next lecture.